Rinse, Repeat, Transcend, The Spiritual Power of Habit, by David Rousseau. He stood in front of the mirror. Veins like rivers, muscles carved from repetition, squat, bench, deadlift, repeat. His body was not built in a day, it was built in cycles. Simple movements, done again, and again, and again. Now ask yourself, if repetition can sculpt a body, what can it do to a soul? Because whether you notice it or not, your life is already on repeat. The question is, what are you becoming? Introduction. There is a quiet force shaping your life. It does not shout. It does not demand attention. Yet it governs your days, your decisions, and ultimately, your destiny. That force is habit. From the moment you wake up to the moment you fall asleep, you are practicing patterns. Thoughts you revisit, emotions you rehearse, actions you repeat. Over time, these patterns carve grooves not just in your brain, but in your spirit. You are not becoming something someday. You are becoming something right now. Ancient wisdom has always pointed to this truth. We are not defined by what we intend, but by what we repeatedly do. Intention may spark change, but repetition sustains it. And here is the deeper truth most people overlook. Habits are not just behavioral, they are spiritual. They either anchor you in awareness, compassion, and purpose, or pull you toward distraction, ego, and unconscious living. Every reaction you repeat strengthens a version of you. Every pause you practice creates space for a different one. This is not a book about optimizing your schedule or mastering surface-level routines. It is about something far more fundamental. It is about recognizing that every repeated act, no matter how small, is a vote for the person you are becoming and the life you are creating. A single breath taken with awareness, a single moment of restraint instead of reaction, a single choice to return to presence. These seem insignificant, but repeated, they become identity. Your life is not shaped in grand, cinematic moments. It is shaped in the quiet, unseen repetitions no one applauds. You are already repeating something, a way of thinking, a way of reacting, a way of moving through the world. The only question is, are those repetitions leading you toward growth, or keeping you comfortably the same? This is an invitation to become conscious of your cycles, to interrupt what no longer serves you, to choose, with intention, what you practice daily, because what you practice, you embody, and what you embody, you become. Rinse, repeat, transcend. Chapter 1. The Hidden Power of Repetition. Repetition is quiet. It does not announce itself when it begins. It does not ask for recognition as it works, and yet, it is one of the most powerful forces shaping who you become. No one notices the first push-up. No one celebrates the first early morning. No one applauds the first moment. You choose patience over reaction. But that is how transformation begins, unseen, unremarkable, and often uncomfortable. We tend to look for defining moments in life, breakthroughs, epiphanies, sudden shifts that change everything at once. But more often than not, what truly defines you is not a single moment, it is a pattern, a rhythm of behavior repeated over time. Every day, you are reinforcing something. Every time you react without thinking, you strengthen reactivity. Every time you pause and observe, you strengthen awareness. Every time you choose resentment, you deepen that pathway. Every time you choose compassion, you widen that one instead. These choices may feel small in the moment, almost insignificant, but repetition compounds, not all at once but steadily, quietly, and with undeniable direction. Think of water flowing over stone. A single drop does nothing, but over time, that same gentle movement can carve canyons. This is how your inner world is shaped. Spiritual growth is not a lightning strike, it is erosion. Slow, consistent, transformative. The challenge is that repetition is easy to ignore in its early stages, because the results are not immediate. We underestimate its impact. We dismiss small actions. We tell ourselves, this doesn't matter, or I'll start tomorrow. But tomorrow is built from today's repetitions. What you do once may feel like a choice. What you do repeatedly becomes a tendency, and what becomes a tendency eventually feels like who you are. This is how identity is formed, not through declarations, but through patterns. You don't become patient by wishing for patience. You become patient by practicing patience again and again, especially when it's difficult. You don't become mindful by thinking about mindfulness. You become mindful by returning to the present moment over and over, even when your mind resists. Repetition is the bridge between intention and embodiment, and here is where the spiritual dimension reveals itself. Every repeated action is not just shaping your behavior, it is shaping your consciousness. It determines what you notice, what you feel, what you believe is possible. If you repeatedly rush, your life begins to feel like urgency. If you repeatedly pause, your life begins to feel like presence. If you repeatedly criticize yourself, your inner world becomes harsh. If you repeatedly offer yourself compassion, your inner world softens. You are not just living your life, you are rehearsing it. The question is, are you rehearsing the life you actually want to live? Many people move through their days, unconsciously repeating patterns they never chose, patterns inherited from environment, past experiences, or fear. They wake up and step into the same mental loops, the same emotional reactions, the same behaviors day after day, not because they consciously choose to, but because repetition has made those patterns automatic. This is the double-edged nature of repetition. It can build you or bind you. It can elevate your awareness or reinforce your limitations. But once you begin to see it, something changes. You start to notice the moments that once passed unnoticed, the reaction you usually default to, the thought you always return to, the habit that quietly defines your day. And in that noticing, there is power, because awareness interrupts unconscious repetition. In the moment you interrupt a pattern, you create a choice. That choice may feel small, it may feel insignificant, but it is the beginning of transformation. One different response, one conscious breath, one new direction. Repeated over time, it becomes a new pattern, a new rhythm, a new way of being. This is how change actually happens, not all at once, but one repetition at a time. So, do not underestimate the quiet power of what you do daily. Do not dismiss the small moments where you choose differently, because these are not just moments. They are building something. They are shaping someone. They are shaping you. What you repeat, you become. Chapter 2. The spiritual weight of small actions. We tend to exaggerate the importance of defining moments, while quietly overlooking the power of what seems insignificant. We often picture change as something dramatic, a sudden awakening, a decisive turning point, a single event that reshapes everything. But transformation rarely arrives with that kind of force. More often, it arrives quietly. It shows up in the background of your day, in the barely noticeable decisions you make without fanfare, a conscious breath before speaking, a brief moment of gratitude when you wake, a small pause before reacting out of habit. On their own, they don't feel meaningful. They don't register as growth. They don't seem to shift anything at all. But on a deeper level, they matter more than they appear to, because every small action is also a subtle alignment. Each one gently steers you in a direction, even if only by a fraction. And over time, those fractions accumulate into something unmistakable. The difficulty is that we are wired to respond to intensity. We expect change to feel immediate. We look for visible confirmation. We want proof that something is working right away. So when a quiet practice doesn't produce a strong emotional signal, we abandon it. We underestimate the slow, invisible consistency that actually reshapes a life. But the deeper self doesn't respond to intensity the way the surface mind does. The surface craves disruption. The deeper self is formed through repetition and presence. Consider how trust develops between people, not through isolated grand gestures, but through steady, repeated reliability over time. Inner alignment works in much the same way. It is built gradually, moment by moment. Each time you choose presence over distraction, you strengthen awareness. Each time you choose compassion over criticism, you soften your inner world. Each time you choose honesty over avoidance, you move closer to integrity. These choices may take only seconds, but they leave a lasting imprint. This is the hidden structure of inner growth. Small actions, consistently repeated, reshape everything. The challenge is that small actions don't offer immediate reward. They require patience without feedback. They require trust without visible evidence. They require continuing even when nothing seems to be happening. Yet beneath the surface, change is always in motion. New patterns are forming. Old reactions are weakening. Your inner landscape is quietly reorganizing itself. The way you speak to yourself, the way you handle discomfort, the way you move through ordinary moments, this is where life is actually lived, not in rare highlights, but in the repetition of the everyday. How you drink your water, how you listen without interrupting, how you sit with silence instead of escaping it. These are not trivial details. They are expressions of your current state of being, and they are also entry points for change, opportunities to practice awareness, opportunities to practice patience, opportunities to become aligned with the person you intend to be. Growth doesn't require a different life. It requires a different way of engaging with the one you already have, and that begins with small actions, not flawless ones, not dramatic ones, just deliberate ones, because intention is what transforms the ordinary into something meaningful. A routine becomes a ritual, a moment becomes a practice, a habit becomes a path back to presence. So, when something feels too small to matter, don't dismiss it too quickly. It may not reshape your life instantly, but repeated enough times quietly, steadily, will reshape you. Change doesn't arrive in leaps. It accumulates in steps, subtle, consistent, almost invisible steps, and each one carries more significance than it first appears. Chapter 3. Autopilot versus Awareness. Most people are not actively creating their lives moment by moment. They are replaying them. Wake up, check the phone, scroll without thinking, rush into obligations, react to whatever appears, end the day drained, repeat. It feels normal, predictable, even productive. But underneath that rhythm is something else entirely, a quiet absence of conscious presence. This is autopilot. Autopilot isn't just about routine. It's about disconnection from the experience of living itself. When you operate this way, behavior is driven by conditioning rather than intention. Reactions happen before reflection. Thoughts pass unexamined, quietly shaping emotion and behavior in the background. You are functioning, but not fully aware, moving, but not fully present. Over time, this dulls experience. Days begin to feel interchangeable. Moments lose their depth. Life starts to feel like something happening to you rather than something you are actively participating in. The danger of autopilot is not sudden or dramatic. It is gradual. You don't notice the shift in real time. You simply drift, a reaction repeated without question, a habit followed without awareness, a pattern reinforced one small choice at a time, until eventually, what once felt like choice becomes default. This is how people end up, living long stretches of life inside patterns they never consciously selected, responding the same way to stress, thinking the same recurring thoughts, avoiding the same internal discomfort, not because they consciously decided to, but because nothing ever interrupted the cycle. Awareness is what interrupts it. Awareness is the simple but profound act of noticing what is happening while it is happening. It is the gap between impulse and action, the space between emotion and expression, the moment where automatic reaction doesn't yet have the final word. In that space, something shifts. Choice becomes available again. Instead of reacting immediately, you can respond more deliberately. Instead of believing every thought, you can examine it. Instead of repeating a pattern, you can interrupt it. But awareness is not a permanent state you arrive at once. It is a practice you return to repeatedly. At first, it feels inconsistent. You remember to be present and then forget. You notice after reacting rather than before. You catch the pattern only once it has already played out. This is not failure. It is the process of learning to see. Awareness develops the way anything else does, through repetition. Each moment of noticing strengthens clarity. Each moment of observation creates space. Each return to the present reinforces presence itself. Individually, these moments seem minor, but each one breaks the momentum of unconscious living, and every break creates room for something new. A different response, a more intentional choice, a shift toward alignment with deeper values instead of inherited habits. Without awareness, patterns run unattended. With awareness, they become visible and therefore changeable. This is the real turning point in inner growth, not when external circumstances shift, but when perception itself begins to change. You start to observe thoughts instead of merging with them. You start to experience emotions without being overtaken by them. You begin to recognize the patterns that once felt like identity. And in that recognition, something loosens. You are no longer fully absorbed in every reaction, no longer entirely defined by every habit. You become the one who notices, and from that position, change becomes possible, because transformation cannot happen in blindness, only in awareness. Awareness does not erase difficulty, stress, frustration, fear. They still arise, but instead of being completely carried by them, you gain the ability to meet them with space, to pause, to breathe, to choose. Autopilot deepens unconscious repetition. Awareness gently returns you to yourself, and each return, even after forgetting, reinforces a different way of being, one that is more deliberate, more conscious, more alive to the present moment, because in the end, awareness is not about controlling life. It is about actually experiencing it, fully, directly, one moment at a time. Chapter 4. The direction of your repetition. Not all repetition moves you forward. Some patterns build clarity, strength, and peace. Others quietly pull you into distraction, tension, and disconnection. Both are repetitions, both are habits, but they lead in very different directions. This is the part many people overlook. We tend to think of habits in terms of good or bad, productive or unproductive. But from a spiritual perspective, the more important question is not whether habit is efficient, it's whether it is aligned. Aligned with presence, aligned with truth, aligned with the person you are trying to become. Because every repeated action is directional. It is taking you somewhere. Every time you reach for your phone without thinking, you reinforce distraction. Every time you complain, you reinforce dissatisfaction. Every time you rush through a moment, you reinforce disconnection. These patterns may feel harmless. They may even feel normal. But normal does not mean neutral. Repetition always leaves a trace. It shapes how you see the world. It shapes how you experience yourself within it. And over time, it shapes what feels familiar, what feels like you. In the same way, intentional habits carry direction too. Every time you pause before reacting, you move toward awareness. Every time you express gratitude, you move toward openness. Every time you choose patience, you move toward inner steadiness. Again, the individual moments seem small, but direction is not determined in a single step. It is determined over many. Imagine walking just a few degrees off course. At first, the difference is barely noticeable, but over time, that slight shift leads you to a completely different destination. Your habits work the same way. The question is not, does this matter today? The question is, where is this leading me over time? Because habits are not isolated events. They are trajectories, and the longer you repeat them, the harder they are to change, not because change is impossible, but because the direction has been reinforced. This is why awareness matters so deeply. Without it, you can spend years reinforcing patterns that lead you further away from what you actually want: peace, clarity, connection, while believing you are simply living your life. But once you begin to see the direction of your habits, something shifts. You start to ask different questions. Not is this easy, not is this comfortable, but is this aligned? Does this thought bring me closer to clarity or deeper into confusion? Does this action create peace or reinforce tension? Does this pattern expand me or limit me? These questions are not meant to judge you. They are meant to guide you. Because the goal is not perfection. You will still fall into distraction. You will still react. You will still repeat patterns that do not serve you. That is part of being human. But with awareness, those moments become temporary, not defining. You begin to course correct, again and again. Each time you notice you are moving in a direction that doesn't feel true, you have the opportunity to shift even slightly, and that slight shift matters. A single conscious choice may not feel like transformation, but it changes your direction, and changed direction, repeated over time, becomes a changed life. This is how spiritual growth unfolds, not through sudden, dramatic reinvention, but through consistent, intentional redirection. You don't need to control every action. You don't need to be perfect. You simply need to pay attention to where your repetitions are leading you, because whether you realize it or not, you are always moving. The only question is, are your habits guiding you toward the life you seek, or gently carrying you away from it? Chapter 5. Discipline as devotion. Discipline is often misunderstood. To many, it sounds like restriction, like control, like forcing yourself into behaviors you do not want to do. But that interpretation misses something essential. True discipline is not punishment. It is not the denial of freedom. It is devotion. Devotion to something deeper than impulse, deeper than comfort, deeper than the shifting moods of the moment. Because if you observe closely, most suffering does not come from a lack of discipline itself, but from being disciplined toward the wrong things. People are incredibly disciplined, just not always consciously. They are disciplined in checking their phones, disciplined in avoiding discomfort, disciplined in repeating the same thoughts, the same reactions, the same emotional loops. The question is never whether discipline exists in your life. It always exists. The question is, what are you devoted to through it? Every repeated action is a form of devotion, even the unconscious ones. When you consistently choose distraction over presence, you are devoted to distraction. When you consistently choose reactivity over awareness, you are devoted to reactivity. When you consistently avoid what is difficult, you are devoted to avoidance. Not because you intend to be, but because repetition reveals direction. This is where discipline becomes spiritual. Because spiritual discipline is not about forcing yourself into a rigid structure. It is about consciously choosing what you repeatedly return to. It is the decision to align your daily actions with the kind of person you know yourself to be beneath habit and fear. And that alignment is rarely dramatic. It is quiet. It looks like showing up when you do not feel like it. It looks like pausing before you speak. It looks like choosing awareness in moments where unconsciousness would be easier. No one applauds these choices. No one may even notice them. But something within you does. Because each act of conscious discipline strengthens an internal signal. I am not only my impulses. I am also my awareness. This is where devotion begins. Not in intensity, but in consistency. You do not become aligned through occasional effort. You become aligned through repeated return. Return to presence. Return to truth. Return to what you value, even when it is inconvenient. And over time, something subtle begins to shift. What once required effort starts to feel natural. What once felt like resistance starts to feel like integrity. You are no longer forcing yourself into a pattern. You are living in alignment with one. This is the quiet reward of discipline. Not external recognition, not sudden transformation, but internal coherence, a sense that your actions and your awareness are no longer in conflict. Of course, this does not mean discipline becomes effortless. There will still be days of resistance, days when old patterns feel stronger than intention, days when you forget what you are trying to build. That is not failure. That is repetition still in motion. The difference now is that you notice, and in noticing, you return, again and again, because discipline, at its core, is not about never falling. It is about always coming back to presence, coming back to intention, coming back to what you said matters. This return is devotion in action, not grand, not performative, but steady, quiet, and deeply transformative. And slowly, without force, it reshapes you, not into someone new, but into someone more aligned with what was always within you. Discipline, then, is not the opposite of freedom. It is how freedom is practiced. Chapter 6. Rituals that anchor the soul. Not every action is just an action. Some are simply functional, done to get through the day, to complete a task, to move from one moment to the next. But others, when done with awareness, become something different entirely. They become rituals. The difference is not in what you do, but in how you do it. A ritual is repetition infused with presence. A habit becomes mechanical when it is unconscious. A ritual becomes sacred when it is intentional. You can drink water quickly while thinking about what's next. Or you can pause, feel the act of drinking, and recognize it as nourishment. The physical action is the same, but the inner experience is entirely different. One is consumption, the other is communion. This is how ordinary life is quietly transformed. Most people wait for extraordinary moments to feel connected to something deeper, but the spiritual path does not require extraordinary circumstances. It requires attention to ordinary ones. A morning is just a morning until you meet it consciously. A walk is just movement until you become present within it. A breath is just biology until you notice it as life itself moving through you. Rituals are not about adding more to your life. They are about deepening what is already there. They anchor you, In a world that constantly pulls your attention outward toward screens, obligations, distractions, and noise, rituals bring you back inward, not as escape, but as return, a return to yourself, a return to stillness, a return to presence. And over time, these small returns begin to accumulate, because what you repeatedly return to begins to shape your inner landscape. If you begin your day in awareness, you carry a different quality into the hours that follow. If you pause before reacting, you create space where reactivity once lived. If you end your day with reflection instead of distraction, you close the loop of experience with intention. None of this requires dramatic change. It requires consistency. A ritual does not need to be complex. In fact, simplicity is what makes it powerful. It does not rely on external conditions. It relies on your willingness to be present. Even a single breath can become a ritual when you meet it fully. But the challenge is not in understanding this, it is in remembering it. Because the mind prefers efficiency over presence. It wants to move quickly, to complete tasks, to stay ahead of what is next. Ritual interrupts that momentum. It asks you to slow down, to notice, to be where you are. And at first, that can feel unnecessary, even uncomfortable. But slowly, something shifts. The repetition of presence begins to soften your inner world. You start to notice subtleties you once missed, the texture of silence, the rhythm of your thoughts, the emotional undercurrents beneath your reactions. Life does not become different, it becomes deeper. This is the anchoring effect of ritual. It does not remove chaos from your life. It changes your relationship to it. You are no longer entirely swept away by the pace of things. You have moments of return, moments of grounding, moments where you are no longer reacting, but simply being. And those moments matter more than they seem, because they remind you that you are not only your schedule, your responsibilities, or your thoughts. You are also awareness itself. Ritual keeps that awareness alive, not as an idea, but as an experience you return to again and again. And over time, these returns begin to shape your nervous system, your perception, and your sense of self. You become less fragmented, less scattered, more present within your own life, not because life becomes simpler but because you become more anchored within it. This is the quiet power of ritual. It does not change the world around you. It changes the way you inhabit it, and in doing so, it brings you back again and again to what was always here. Presence, awareness, life, fully met. Chapter 7. Breaking cycles that no longer serve you. Not every pattern in your life deserves to continue. Some habits once protected you. Some reactions once helped you survive. Some ways of thinking once made sense in a different chapter of your life. But what once helped you survive can quietly become what keeps you stuck. This is how cycles form. A reaction repeats long enough to become automatic. An avoidance becomes familiar. A belief becomes identity. And without noticing, you begin living inside patterns that are no longer aligned with who you are becoming. The most difficult part is not that these cycles are painful. It is that they are familiar. Familiarity has a way of disguising itself as safety. Even when a pattern leads to stress, self-doubt, or disconnection, the mind often prefers it simply because it is known. The nervous system recognizes it. The ego understands its structure. There is a strange comfort in predictability even when it limits you. This is why people repeat what they consciously want to change, not because they lack awareness entirely, but because awareness alone is not always enough to interrupt momentum. Cycles are built through repetition, and they are maintained through unconscious return. You do not choose them every time. You often slip into them. A familiar thought arises, a familiar emotion follows, a familiar reaction completes the loop. And just like that, the cycle continues. Breaking a cycle is not a single decision. It is a series of interruptions. Small, deliberate moments where you notice what is happening and choose not to complete the pattern in its usual way. The thought appears, but you do not follow it all the way down. The emotion rises, but you do not immediately act from it. The impulse arrives, but you create a pause before responding. That pause is everything, because within that pause, the cycle loses its automatic power. For a moment, the pattern is no longer running you. You are witnessing it, and in witnessing, something opens. You begin to realize that what felt like you was often just repetition, not your full identity, not your entire truth, but a loop that has been rehearsed enough times to feel permanent. This recognition is both liberating and uncomfortable. Liberating, because it reveals that change is possible. Uncomfortable, because it asks you to stop relying on what is familiar. Breaking cycles requires courage, not dramatic courage, but quiet courage, the willingness to sit in unfamiliar space, the willingness to not immediately return to what you know, the willingness to feel the discomfort of change, without escaping back into old patterns. At first, the old cycle will still call you back. It will feel automatic. It will feel justified. It will feel easier, and you may return to it many times before anything truly shifts. That is not failure. That is repetition still dissolving, because cycles do not break in a single moment, they weaken over time. Each interruption creates a small gap in the pattern. Each moment of awareness introduces uncertainty into what was once automatic. Each conscious choice builds a new possibility. Slowly, the loop begins to loosen. What once felt inevitable starts to feel optional. And in that space of option, transformation begins. You begin to see that you are not bound to every thought that appears. You are not obligated to repeat every emotional pattern. You are not required to live inside the same story forever. You can pause. You can choose differently. You can begin again in the middle of what once felt fixed. This is the deeper meaning of breaking cycles. It is not about forcefully erasing parts of yourself. It is about no longer unconsciously repeating what does not reflect who you are becoming. Some cycles will take time to unwind. Some will require patience beyond what feels comfortable. But every interruption matters, because each one is a message to yourself. This is not the only way I can respond. This is not the only version of me that exists. This pattern does not define me. And over time, those messages accumulate into change. Not sudden, not perfect, but real, until one day, you notice something subtle has shifted. The cycle that once controlled you no longer feels automatic. The reaction that once defined you no longer feels inevitable. There is space now, and in that space, a different kind of life becomes possible. Chapter 8. The Identity Loop. There is a hidden loop running beneath almost every habit you have. It is not just what you do. It is who you believe you are while you do it. Most people think change begins with behavior, but behavior is only the surface. Underneath every action is identity, and identity quietly governs what feels possible, natural, or even like you. This is why lasting change is difficult. You can force new behaviors for a time, wake up earlier, eat differently, react more calmly, but if the underlying identity remains unchanged, the old patterns eventually pull you back, because the mind is always trying to maintain coherence. It prefers consistency over contradiction. It prefers what aligns with its existing self-image. If you see yourself as someone who is inconsistent, you will unconsciously find ways to act inconsistently even when you consciously want discipline. If you see yourself as someone who is reactive, you will justify reactions even when you desire calm. If you see yourself as someone who always struggles, you will find ways to continue the struggle, even in new forms, not because you are trying to fail, but because identity seeks confirmation. This is the identity loop. You act based on who you believe you are, and then your actions reinforce who you believe you are. It is circular, self-perpetuating, subtle, and most people never question it. They try to change the behavior without ever addressing the belief behind it. They attempt to rearrange the surface while the foundation remains untouched. But real transformation does not begin with doing. It begins with being. Not the final version of you, just a slightly revised understanding of yourself. This is where awareness becomes powerful again, because the moment you notice your identity at work, the loop loosens. You begin to hear the inner statements running in the background. I am not good at this. I always end up here. This is just how I am. These thoughts do not feel like choices. They feel like truths, but they are often just repeated interpretation stories reinforced over time until they feel solid. And once a story feels solid, it starts shaping behavior automatically. But identity is not fixed. It is formed through repetition, just like habits, which means it can also be reformed, not by forcing a dramatic reinvention, but by gently introducing new evidence through small, consistent actions. Every time you act differently from your old identity, you create tension in the loop. If you have always seen yourself as someone who avoids discomfort, and you stay present for a difficult moment instead of escaping it, something subtle shifts. A crack appears in the old definition. If you have always seen yourself as someone who reacts quickly, and you pause before responding, even once, you are no longer fully contained by that identity. You are expanding beyond it. At first, these moments feel small, almost insignificant, but identity is not changed by intensity. It is changed by repetition. One new action does not rewrite who you are, but repeated new actions begin to redefine what feels familiar. And familiarity is what identity is built on. Over time, something interesting happens. What once required effort begins to feel natural. What once felt foreign begins to feel like possibility. What once felt like not me begins to feel like also me. This is how identity evolves, not through rejection of the past, but through expansion beyond it. You are not erasing who you were. You are outgrowing it. And as the loop loosens, something important emerges. Choice. You are no longer fully driven by the story of who you think you are. You begin to participate in shaping it. This is the quiet turning point. Not becoming someone entirely different overnight, but realizing that the definition of you is more flexible than you were taught to believe, and with that realization, a new responsibility appears. To notice the stories you repeat, to question the identities you reinforce, to choose actions that align with who you are becoming, not only who you have been, because identity is not just something you carry, it is something you continuously create, one repetition at a time. Chapter 9. Consistency over intensity. We're naturally attracted to intensity, dramatic change, sudden insight, moments that feel powerful enough to shift everything in an instant. There's a certain emotional pull in believing that one surge of effort or clarity can permanently redirect a life. But life doesn't usually work that way. Intensity flares up and then it fades. Consistency, by contrast, quietly reshapes what stays. One of the subtler truths of inner growth is this. It's not the high points that define you, but the repeated ones. One long meditation session doesn't make you calm. One burst of discipline doesn't make you disciplined. One clear realization doesn't make your mind clear. But when something is practiced every day, it begins to alter your baseline. Consistency operates quietly. It doesn't depend on how you feel. It doesn't wait for inspiration. It simply continues even when the moment feels ordinary or insignificant. That's exactly where its strength lies. Because real change often happens not when motivation is high, but when you keep going without it. This is where many people lose momentum. They start strong, driven by insight, frustration, or desire. For a while, everything clicks. Effort feels easy. Commitment feels natural. But intensity is meant to last. When that initial energy fades, all that remains is repetition. And without consistency, repetition slips back into old habits. That's why cycles tend to repeat. The desire to change is genuine, but the structure supporting it often isn't steady enough to sustain it. Growth doesn't rely on temporary states. It depends on returning again and again. Returning to awareness. Returning to intention. Returning to practice. Even when it feels routine. Even when it feels dull. Even when it seems like nothing is happening. Because something is always happening beneath the surface. Every time you come back to a practice, whether it's mindfulness, honesty, patience, or reflection, you're reinforcing a direction within yourself. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but steadily, like water shaping rock. Consistency works through persistence, not force. This can be hard to value in a world that rewards quick results. We're used to seeing progress immediately. We want proof that what we're doing is working. But deeper internal shifts don't show up right away. They build quietly until one day you notice something different. You react with more space. You're less caught in old patterns. And you may not even know when it changed. Because consistency doesn't create a single turning point. It creates a slow shift in orientation. That's why small daily actions matter more than occasional intense ones. A few moments of presence each day can become a way of being. A small choice toward awareness, repeated, becomes your default. A simple return to truth, practiced daily, becomes part of who you are. It's not how big the action is, it's how consistently it continues. Intensity can spark change, but it rarely maintains it. Consistency may feel quieter, but it builds something that lasts. Still, it isn't always easy. There will be days when it feels useless, days when nothing seems to move, days when old habits feel stronger than your intention. Those are the days when consistency matters most, because continuing without immediate reward is what turns effort into something embodied. At that point, you're no longer acting only from inspiration, you're acting from commitment. And commitment, sustained over time, becomes character. Eventually, what once took effort begins to feel natural, not because it's suddenly effortless, but because it has been integrated into who you are. You're no longer trying to stay consistent. You simply are. That's the quiet outcome of repetition over time. Not a dramatic transformation, but a subtle shift in how you show up when no one is watching, when nothing external is pushing you, when you're simply meeting the moment as it is. And in that steady meeting, something stabilizes within you, a sense of grounding, a sense of continuity, a sense that you're no longer starting over each day, but continuing something meaningful, not because every day goes perfectly, but because you keep returning. In the end, consistency isn't about never falling off track. It's about always coming back. Chapter 10, Becoming Through Repetition. At a certain point, repetition no longer feels like effort. What once required intention and discipline begins to happen on its own. You don't have to remind yourself to pause, you just pause. Awareness doesn't feel forced, it shows up naturally. You don't need to remember presence, you notice when you've left it. This is a quiet turning point, not when you begin, not when you struggle to keep going, but when the practice starts expressing itself through you. Becoming isn't a single moment. It's the result of moving in the same direction, over and over, until that movement reshapes you. Over time, repetition doesn't just influence what you do, it changes what you can do without effort. This is how identity shifts into embodiment. In the beginning, everything is deliberate. You try to be patient. You try to stay aware. You try not to react. Each choice takes effort, and there's tension between what you intend and what you habitually do. But repetition softens that tension. What once felt like resistance begins to feel familiar, and familiarity gradually becomes identity. Eventually, the distance between what I'm trying to do and what I naturally do begins to disappear. At that point, discipline is no longer something you apply, it's something you express. Awareness is no longer something you practice, it's something you live within. Growth is no longer something you chase, it's something you embody. Still, this shift doesn't happen all at once. It's built from countless small moments. Moments when you chose differently. Moments when you paused instead of reacting. Moments when you returned instead of drifting. Each one seemed minor, easy to overlook. But together, they created something lasting. Because repetition doesn't just build ability, it builds identity. You become whatever you return to most often. And over time, that return becomes automatic. There's a simple truth in this. You are always shaping yourself through what you repeatedly practice. If you consistently engage in distraction, it becomes your default. If you consistently return to awareness, it becomes natural. If you repeatedly react, reaction becomes instinct. If you repeatedly come back to presence, presence becomes home. This isn't about reward or punishment. It's about patterns. And once patterns are deeply ingrained, they begin to feel like truth. But the deeper reality is that none of this is fixed. What feels automatic now was once learned, and what was learned can be reshaped. This is where real possibility appears. You're not stuck in your patterns, you're continuing them. And if you're continuing them, you can also change their direction, not through force, but through steady repetition. That is the essence of becoming. Not escaping who you are, but gradually shaping who you are through what you do consistently. And at some point quietly, almost unnoticed, you realize something is different. You respond without overthinking. You see clearly without effort. You choose consciously without strain. And you may not know exactly when it happened. Because becoming doesn't announce itself, it accumulates. That's why the process matters more than any single result. You don't arrive at a new version of yourself in one moment. You arrive through repetition, so steady it becomes invisible. What remains isn't the effort, but the expression of it. You're no longer trying to become something new. You're simply living what you've practiced. And this is the final, quiet truth. You are always becoming. The only question is, what are you becoming through? Conclusion: the life you repeat. In the end, your life is not built from rare moments of inspiration, but from ordinary patterns repeated without pause. Not the one time you tried, not the day everything felt clear, not the sudden promise to change, but the thousands of small repetitions that followed or didn't. Wake, think, react, choose, drift, return, repeat. This is the quiet architecture of a human life, and because it is quiet, it is often overlooked. We search for meaning in dramatic shifts, in turning points, in moments that feel large enough to be remembered. But the truth is far less dramatic and far more honest. You are being shaped continuously by what you do most often, when no one is watching, when nothing is forcing you, when you are simply moving through another ordinary day. Habits are not just routines, they are reflections of attention, and attention, repeated, becomes identity. This is why spirituality is never separate from daily life. It is not something reserved for rare moments of meditation, prayer, or insight. It is expressed in how you speak to yourself when you make a mistake. It is present in how you respond when you are frustrated. It lives in the way you treat silence, discomfort, boredom, and time. Every repetition is a direction. Every direction becomes a path. Every path becomes a life. And so the question is not whether you are repeating. You already are. The question is whether you are repeating consciously or unconsciously, whether you are reinforcing what you value or what you drift into, whether your patterns are chosen or inherited, noticed or ignored. Because once seen clearly, repetition becomes something else entirely. It becomes responsibility not as burden, but as awareness. You begin to realize that you are not only the product of your past habits, but also the creator of your future ones, and that what you repeat today is quietly shaping the version of you that will stand here tomorrow. This does not mean perfection is required. It does not mean you will not fall into old patterns, lose awareness, or forget what you intended. You will, but awareness changes the meaning of those moments. They are no longer endpoints. They are interruptions. And every interruption carries the possibility of return. Return to presence. Return to intention. Return to what you know, beneath habit, to be true. Over time, those returns begin to matter more than the departures, because what defines you is not that you drift, but that you come back, again, and again, and again. This is the quiet practice beneath all practices, not achievement, but alignment, not intensity, but continuity. Not becoming something new in a single moment, but gradually remembering what you have always been capable of embodying. And when you look back, you may not find a single defining moment where everything changed. Instead, you will find repetition, small choices, quiet shifts, unnoticed returns, stacked over time until they became a different way of being. This is how a life transforms, not all at once, but through what is repeated. So choose carefully what you return to. Notice what you reinforce. Pay attention to what you practice when no one is guiding you, because in the end, you do not become what you wish for once. You become what you repeat, and what you repeat becomes your life.